Okay, we're going to get started now. Thank you for returning. We're going to have some mixed media for this session, and we're going to try to keep things high energy after lunch, so you guys are entertained and interested in this final couple of hours. Sheldon sort of teed up this idea of technology in the use of rule of law programming. So it was sort of an easy way for me not to have much to say as an intro, because I can just say, well, you know, remember what Sheldon said. But I did want to recount one quick story before we get started. And this was when I first started my international development career. It was in 2000, and I had quit my job as a lawyer doing commercial litigation in Chicago, and I moved to Croatia. And the first thing I learned, this was like, we talk about lessons learned in this field. Well, the first lesson I learned in about 48 hours in Croatia was that they were way ahead of us with mobile phone technology. I had been given, as a lawyer, this old Motorola flip phone that had, like, you know, nine little digits, and I never used it once. I didn't give it to clients. I didn't call other lawyers. I just, for whatever reason, it didn't seem that useful in the year 2000. And I got to Croatia, and I was given a phone, and I was like, oh, I'll never use this phone. I don't use one at home. And all of a sudden, people are calling me, I'm calling them, and it kind of like opened up a whole world of technology for me. I couldn't believe it. And this is in what was supposed to be a country that was still developing. For me, it sort of illustrated an interesting thing that, you know, Croatia was able to leapfrog. Obviously, they didn't have many legacy landlines, so they had to go with cell phones. And you know, leapfrogging technology is one of the advantages that we have as development workers in the developing world, that we can do some of these things. The other thing I wanted to mention, also Croatia, was that at that time, the idea of technology in the rule of law kind of meant one thing, and that was court automation. And that was sort of the only thing that I ever heard of when we talked about, you know, leveraging technology. It was court automation. For those of you who aren't familiar with court automation, what that meant was giving courts a lot of computers and trying to computerize the operations of the court. And there was a big one in Croatia. They were all over the place. And they met with some success, I think, but also limited success. And this also illustrates perhaps some of the shortcomings of technology. I remember talking to one of the judges. We were doing this JRI assessment, Judicial Reform Index assessment for the ABA Rowley. And I was talking to one of the court clerks about this court automation. And the clerk said, well, the computers are great, and the forms, you know, that we do on the computers are great, but it's actually amounted to doubling our work because we still use the paper. We don't trust the computers, so we didn't get rid of any of the old stuff. We just added new stuff on, and that really stinks, so we don't like that. And I remembered that as sort of illustrative of the fact that, you know, you have to also make sure that technology isn't the end in and of itself, that you build systems and reforms around technology, so there's like some of that mutually reinforcing aspect to it. Right, so with that encouraging story, I'm going to introduce our panel now. And we'll start with Kira Buchko, who comes to us as the Senior Technical Director for New Rule.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be with you. As Steve said, I'm Senior Technical Director at New Rule. We're a women-owned small business working in the DG space. I've got about 20 plus years in the field. I see a lot of you all that I remember from the old days. And right now our business is working a lot on access to justice, anti-corruption, and human rights issues, and including some training that one of my colleagues is doing as we speak with Yemeni human rights documentation workers. And I'm going to be talking today about our development of a Legal Defenders mobile app that links legal service providers globally.
Thank you. Our next panelist is Teresa Jennings from LexisNexis.
Hi, everyone, and I go by Terry Jennings, and I'm the head of Rule of Law Development at LexisNexis. It's been my privilege to be with LexisNexis for the last 18 months, working on Rule of Law Development. And before that, I was with our parent company, now called the RELX Group, for over 10 years, heading our state advocacy program. I'm going to talk a little bit in my first example, Eyewitness to Atrocities app, on the role that LexisNexis played with one of our good partners, the International Bar Association, on an app to catalog and to record atrocities around the world. On the second example I'm going to work on, it's for the RELX Group. It was just launched a couple of days ago, and it's to help advance the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals in the UN.
Great, thank you. And our last but not least panelist, Linda Bishai, who's the Director of Research, Evaluation, and Learning at ABA Rowley.
Thank you, Steve. I'm pleased to be at ABA Rowley, and I'm grateful to Rob Boone for doing such a great job introducing Rowley in the last panel. I've only been here with Rowley for 3 months, but I was well aware of the great work that they were doing in advance of that, and I'm delighted to join a stellar team. What I'm going to talk about today are 3 different examples of the use of simple message service, SMS text technology, as simple as it gets, really. You don't even need a smartphone to use this technology, but it's very useful to do a number of really different flexible things. I'm going to talk about a case filing system that uses text messaging in the DRC, as well as an early warning system with community observers also in the DRC. And then also with the use of, helping Syrian refugees in Turkey, we have something called an SMS helpline that connects Syrian refugees in Turkey with Turkish lawyers. I'm going to describe all 3 of those projects.
Great, thank you. So let's start. I'm going to ask the wizard upstairs to give us our first poll. And in keeping with our Source It theme, which we can thank Greg Gisvold, a former panelist, for the concept of. And while you're mulling that over, I'm going to first turn to what we're calling specific country needs and the development of and the use of technology on specific either projects, regions, or countries. And I'm going to ask Linda to start it off.
Great. So I'll try to be brief because I know there are a number of angles we can flesh out later with various questions. In the first case, the SMS case filing system, what we've done in the DRC is link police deep in the field with the provincial capitals because there is a time limitation on the filing of sexual and gender-based violence crime reporting, and it has to be done in text. It has to be written as a case filing requirement. And these the judges and the case records sit in provincial capitals, and many of these crimes, as you can imagine, occur out in the field. So what this project has done is set up a template on a text messaging application platform that can use a simple phone, and given it to police and trained them so that they can actually text on the template the name, the place, the time, the details in a way that matches and synchronizes with a database in the capital. And that allows the cases to be filed within the 24-hour window. And that greatly enhances the ability of these cases to be prosecuted. The second case in the DRC is an early warning system. And this has required a bit more training and more additional staffing of people that we have to train community observers and give them the phones. And basically what this system does is it allows them to liaise with the Civil Protection Unit, which is a hybrid government unit that liaises between the security forces, the police, the military, and MONUSCO, and civil society. And the CPU, the Civil Protection Unit, is the clearinghouse for the early warning information. They are not able to respond. They don't have armed people in their staff, but they are the central body that coordinates with the community monitors throughout the parts of the country that are most at risk. So what we're able to do here is allow for advance notice when things are getting heated, particularly in advance of an event, an election, something that we think might trigger violence, and have the forces be prepared. This is something, I'll say it now, and maybe it'll come up again later, but this particular system, even though it's very, very basic and very simple, faces a major challenge in that what you're dealing with in the DRC is guerrilla terrain. And so one of the problems with it is that even though we consider it a success, it can only really maximize at about a 60% success rate in terms of getting a response on an early warning. And part of that, and probably most of that, is actually the fact that it's even with knowledge that there may be violence about to occur and knowing about it in advance, the various armed forces that might be called on or might be in the vicinity to respond may make the call that they don't have the ability to reach that particular venue, or that they don't particularly care to for a variety of political reasons or staffing reasons. And so because of the difficulty of the conflict, the political nature of the conflict, you don't always get a response. However, for the 60% of cases where there is one, I'm willing to call that a win, especially given that that's a very simple system to put in place and doesn't cost all that much money. In the third case, we're dealing with a pretty significant need, and that is that there are close to 3 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, and the situation for them is quite dire in terms of understanding what their rights are and how to make use of the services that Turkey is prepared to offer. So the Turkish government has put in place a protection regime for Syrian refugees, but most of them aren't aware of it. There's a huge linguistic problem between Arabic-speaking Syrians and Turkish-speaking lawyers and community members who may be willing to help them. And so what we've done with this SMS helpline is connect through Turkish Bar Association members, volunteer, well, they're actually not technically allowed to volunteer, so they are paid a small stipend, but Turkish lawyers who are willing to participate in the helpline process are taking a duty rotation to man a computer system that connects to text numbers that have been collected at community centers for Syrian refugees. So that's a multi-step process. We train the Turkish lawyers to use the system, and it's blind in terms of the phone numbers of the refugees that they use, so the identities of the Syrians are protected. They never meet in person. The Syrians are told that this is volunteer, they can opt in, they can provide their phone number and get the number of the service to use. And then they can, if they provide us their phone number, we will blast a weekly helpful message to them. They can also simply go online and type a question on a website, but we've actually found that that was a fix that there was no problem that fix was needed for, because in fact most people would rather text their questions to the database, so that even though there is a more anonymous online website that they can use to text in questions, they all seem much more comfortable with texting them directly from their phones. So what this has done is give them very basic legal information. It does not offer legal advice on specific cases. It's only factual, neutral advice, very specific things that are relevant for them, such as you may not sell your Syrian car in Turkey. Not all of it's good news, but at least it's technical information that they may find very helpful. And as I said, there's a weekly blast of various legal updates that they can hear, and then questions are answered. And if there are specific legal cases, they can also be referred to a specific attorney in their local area.
Okay, very interesting. I want to ask the audience a question at this point. Oh, by the way, the answer is Carl Sagan. Can we we're going to go old school here on our tech panel. Can you raise your hand if you have been involved in any SMS-based rule of law solution in the field? Just raise your hand. I'm just curious how many other people have experience. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, a handful of them. I asked that because it does seem like such a simple technology, and it's sort of a obvious no-brainer thing, seems low cost and all that. But I haven't been involved in any in 17 years abroad, and I'm sort of surprised why not, in a way. Can you shout out where your project was or where you were involved in? India. Haiti. Okay. Kenya. Kosovo. Okay. Yeah, that's a good cross-section of the world right there.
Yeah.
So the first question is, I mean, is it really cheap to develop? It sounds cheap to execute. Does it cost money? A lot of money to do?
I would say it is relatively cheap to develop. I know at least in the DRC case, the case management, the SMS case filing system was developed by a DRC ABA Rowley employee. And he developed it while working for us. I think the other platforms were designed by consultants, but again, given the way they maximize your reach, I would say they're quite cost effective. I would also point out that Kenya pioneered the use of text messaging service with Ushahidi and the election monitoring and violence early warning system. So this idea of using simple text messaging came from Africa and is extremely useful there.
Interesting. And I'm glad I wanted to actually just ask one more question, then the panelists can also perhaps have some comments here. But there's a push and there's pull, right? So in some of your examples, information's being pushed from users to somebody else, and in other cases, it's being pulled. And I'm curious if push or pull seems to work better, or do they both work?
Yeah, I would say that, well, in the case of the Syrian refugees in Turkey, what I like about that system is that it allows for a two-way communication because the refugees can receive helpful information, but they also have the ability to ask their own specific questions and get an answer and get a response. And I think that it's always helpful to design a project like this with a need to understand how to refine the system. And I would say in the DRC case, the early warning one is probably the one with the least feedback loop because once we train the community observers, they're sort of out there taking risks and feeding us information or feeding the CPU information, helping to build a government capacity there. But kind of out there on their own, and unless help comes, we don't really get a whole lot of two-way communication there. But in the case filing system, that we regularly go out and visit and sort of do some tweaking with the software because it's a little more complex of a software platform. And so that one has required a bit more two-way communication, not on any specific individual project, but just to maintain the functionality of the system.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Linda.
Yeah.
Linda, when I speak, you're going to hear about the data and LexisNexis and our wealth of data. And when I hear about your projects, I'm hearing data.
Yeah.
Is there a way that you're using it not just for the project at hand, but maybe for something bigger later on? So where's the data going and how is that used later?
Right, so we are about to undertake an evaluation. We've got several evaluations in progress of the Turkey project, and Rowley will consider this data. Our country teams will consider whether this means we modify how sustainable we can make this project, whether it can be done with other populations of refugees. The DRC project, in fact, I'm hoping to go out there by the end of this summer and assist in evaluation of the case filing system. So I'll update you then. Rowley is really trying to make we have been recognizing, I don't want to, for lack of a better word, our delinquency in really capturing and making use of all the amazing knowledge we have. I mean, Rowley's been operating in this space for 25 years, has an awful lot of data, has an awful lot of experience and information, and has somehow not had a chance to make the best of it. And we're now in a position where we're starting to look backwards as well as forwards and trying to figure out how to capitalize on what we already know we know. But first we have to kind of go back and figure out that we know it, as well as keeping up with the day-to-day and future-looking projects. But good question, and we're trying to be on it.
Good, good.
I've also got one, Linda. Thinking about the lawyers that you have working with the refugees, does the technology, kind of hearkening to what was said at lunchtime, is there a generational issue? Who are volunteers for this program, and is the fact that it's kind of tech-related have any bearing on who's interested in participating?
The one in Turkey?
Yeah.
I actually don't have age data on the Turkish lawyers, but my guess would be that there's nothing particularly difficult about the technology in the platform. I've seen screen captures of what the pages look like. They're very text-heavy, like what you might see on a form to fill out. They're just questions, and they can type in the answers, and then they're translated before being sent back. So it all happens in Turkish for the Turkish lawyer, and in Arabic for the Syrian asking the question. And I think that the beauty of text messaging is, at its heart, it's still language and still using a keyboard and not particularly difficult. It's an extremely simple platform and a very easy way to make use of a kind of skill set of typing on a keyboard that most adults have.
So maybe you have the older groups.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure, but I'd be quite surprised
Yeah.
if older lawyers were deterred.
Yeah.
I think the deterrence is actually, quite frankly, political.
Yeah.
We soft pedal that it's the American Bar Association helping. So the front of the project is the Turkish Bar Association. We will answer the question honestly if asked, but we don't try to brand it for very political sensitive reasons in Turkey, and getting worse by the day, as you might imagine.
Yeah, Terry's question on the data also led me to wonder if there were privacy concerns. Presumably, this information is also in the hands of Turkish Telecom or whoever is the telecom that has this. And I'm just curious. In many experiences I've had, people are suspicious of the government getting information about their legal issues or their concerns or whatever, and are oftentimes, kind of afraid of. Have you run into that issue at all? Or?
So in all of these projects, there's a risk if there's an expert hacker, but there is some basic encryption. In the Turkish case, the accounts are encrypted, the messages are encrypted, and the accounts are kept secret. So there's no place where you can see the name of the person who's submitting the question to the attorney. But if someone really wanted to find it and was trying hard, they could. We didn't cover it up that much. And that is, in the context of Turkey, you're right, that's sort of relevant. And I think basically the idea is, look, we're connecting you, we're not doing anything that the Turkish government should object to. We are providing you with factual information about what the Turkish government's law about the aid available to Syrians is. And so there's nothing subversive about it, so there's not really a need to crack down. We're not connecting insurgents or rebels with any access to anything. So there's kind of, I think we're operating on the assumption that a bare minimum will do at the moment until we see otherwise. The filing system for the police is also not encrypted, or rather, it's not protected. It sits on the database once the message has been sent. It is located in the database in the capital city, and it is there for the taking. But again, we're operating in the DRC, and we're assuming that if the office is kept locked and staffed by responsible people, this information isn't something that is particularly monetizable or desirable. That's something we'll have to keep an eye on if circumstances change or if there's a high-profile case in question. But at the moment, this is not something that's really critical for these types of violence cases in the DRC. The early warning system has an interesting feature. As soon as the early warning is transmitted, it's deleted from the phone that sent it. If one of our community organizers, observers, has sent a message, and then the village is overrun by a rebel force, and they are captured, the phone won't reveal anything, absent some advanced hacking technique. But again, we're assuming that that's not going to be a risk in the DRC.
Interesting. Okay. Did you want to?
I just had one quick question that came up. In the DRC, do the victims have any knowledge that this technology is available in terms of being able to file their cases within 24 hours?
Yeah, I think the cases have to be filed by the police officers rather than the victims.
Right, but
yeah.
in terms of knowing that that's,
That they should tell the police to file? I don't know the answer to that. That's a really good question. From what I know of the way the case was designed, it's to work and train the police, to work with them to make that part of it seamless. It'd be an interesting question to know whether the system can handle a really aware population.
right?
And what that might do to getting the numbers bumped up. I can ask my colleagues.
Okay. Well, our lunchtime speaker talked a little bit about scale. So we're going to move from sort of a country-specific set of solutions to something that could be scaled up internationally. And I'm going to ask Terry to sort of set up the next one. Before we start, though, I'm going to ask the Poll Everywhere wizard to unleash the next poll. So while you're thinking about the answers here, maybe we'll let Terry go.
I'd be happy to. So in 2013, my very good colleague Nigel Roberts, who's the Vice President of Global Associations for LexisNexis, was in the UK. And he was meeting with a good relationship colleague of ours, the International Bar Association. Wendy Betts is the director of what is now the Eyewitness to Atrocities app. And they were talking. And she informed him of a project she was working on. And as he put it, he peered over her shoulder and looked on the computer screen and saw what she was up to. She asked, "Can you help?" And he immediately brought the concept to my boss and his boss, our Executive Vice President and General Counsel of LexisNexis, Ian McDougall, who gave an emphatic yes. Let me step back for a moment, because many of you may be asking yourself, why would LexisNexis be getting involved with the International Bar Association on a tech solution that's global when you guys track laws? Well, our CEO, Mike Walsh, several years ago, brought Ian aside and said, I want to have a corporate mission that takes the best of what we do and use our corporate mission to advance the world, particularly for our clients. And that corporate mission is to advance the rule of law around the world. And when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense for LexisNexis. Well, the first thing that Ian did, being tasked with this new priority, was to read through the laws and to read through the definitions of the rule of law around the world. Well, Ian's a pretty intelligent guy, and he's also a very ethical guy, and what he found was it was a mishmash. And it was not easily understandable, you had to have a law degree, and that wasn't what he was looking for. And so he boiled our definition of the rule of law down to 4 simple elements that can be easily understood by people who are not lawyers, and used in a number of ways. And those 4 elements are transparency of the law. Is it written down? Access to legal remedy. Is there a system that people trust in their community to get a legal outcome? Equal treatment under the law. Are people going to be treated equally when the law applies to them? And then finally, an independent judiciary. Is the law being interpreted by the law at hand, or is something external to the law, like corruption or a bribe, changing that outcome? So when Ian said yes, he had this newly crafted definition in mind, and we put our resources to it. So I want to cue the video to show what the app is about, and then I'll come back and talk about it a bit.
In their discussion, they touched on an initiative designed to assist citizens in using their cell phones to video and document atrocities, showing the tragic results when there is an absence of the rule of law. An example of the need to protect and preserve such citizen documentation reached popular attention in 2009. A video taken on a mobile phone by a Sri Lankan soldier documenting the Sri Lankan army executing captured prisoners was dismissed by the Sri Lanka government as a fake. Without further substantiation, the video was deemed inadmissible in a court of law. The United Nations subsequently concluded, however, that the video was authentic. The International Bar Association took the initiative to launch a program designed to ensure that such videos would not be so easily dismissed in the future. The International Bar Association and LexisNexis worked to develop a smartphone app called Eyewitness to Atrocities. This app, through technology that proves photos have not been altered, has the capability of verifying images and data to allow them to be admissible as evidence in courts of law. Since its launch, the app has been downloaded by 10,000 people from 136 countries.
Video gives you a little bit of background about this. It was done about a year ago for a webinar that Ian hosted with the UNGC. And so the numbers of downloads of that app have gone up. But one of the things that we did in working with the IBA is listen to what their needs were. Well, first, it had to be on an Android phone. Why? Because most of the atrocities around the world are in places where the smartphone isn't readily used. It was used on an Android. Second, we learned a little bit more about the partners that were already helping. So they were working with an app developer, CompactSoft. They were working with DLA Piper and other law firms around the world. So these are legal experts. They know what's important to have a legal case brought in an international tribunal and have it successful. As we saw in the video, in Sri Lanka, that was missing. The chain of custody of that data was broken. And so they came to us, IBA, because we are experts at data. We have more than 2.6 petabytes of data. Now, I'm not a technologist, but that's 4 times Wikipedia. We're the 4th largest paid digital content provider in the world. That's our global company. We have over 5 million news sources of data that we're downloading, I think, daily. So when you take that level of data and you think of the multiple billions of connections that we can make every day, working with data in a secure way makes a lot of sense for us. This was the brainchild of Mark Ellis, who is the executive director of IBA. He knows what the lawyers are looking for. He knows where in the world he can deploy his lawyers to use this app. One of the other components that Wendy was looking for in developing the app was making sure that the people taking those videos were not the next victim. So the app can be downloaded in 3 different forms, so it looks like just an average camera phone. So it doesn't look like it's something that is doing something extraordinary. Moreover, much like what Linda said, if someone sees somebody taking a picture or a video, there's a button where you can swipe it immediately and it's gone. But the metadata is preserved, and that's where Lexis came in. We are experts at combining the information so that the geolocation, the ISP address, and certain other key elements to show where in time, when in time, that video was taken isn't lost if that person needs to wipe it. It's remaining clear. And finally, you talked a little bit about privacy and security, so I want to address that one. We at LexisNexis know how important that is. When you hold the level of information that we do, your systems have to be secure. And so we worked with the IBA to make sure that people couldn't hack in. Imagine if they knew that there was a video and it was showing a true atrocity, they would try to hack in and either destroy it or change that video. That's where we used our core skills. And I'd say that knowing one's core skills is a first step towards developing a solution. So one of the things I also wanted to mention were the outcomes. The app won the 2015 App Design Awards for the UK, and it won the Geneva Center for Security Policy Innovation in Global Security in Innovation Prize in 2016. Mark Ellis, again, this was his brainchild, said the following: "I cannot think of a better way to address these transgressions than empowering activists around the world to pursue justice and accountability for the most serious international crimes committed against fellow human beings. We know that true commitment to this undertaking is essential for long-term success of this project, and a partner equally steadfast in belief is critical. The support of LexisNexis has been integral to the success thus far of the Eyewitness Project, and I'm certain will continue for many years from now."
That's it's a really cool app. I mean, it's a great tool. I'm curious if you've had any feedback from law enforcement or courts or government officials. Is this being positively sort of received? Is it skepticism, mixed?
So my role is to talk in this one about supporting a key partner, and I would say that Wendy probably knows the answer to that far better than I would. She has gotten kudos from around the world, and she well should. This is a brilliant, award-winning solution, and I know from personal experience there have been various groups who have been looking to replicate and expand on the good that has been done here. So looking at beyond atrocities, could it be expanded to women, say in India or elsewhere? And so how can the basic module of truly capturing atrocities around the world be expanded out?
Very cool. Kira or Linda, did you have any questions or comments on it?
I'm actually curious to know if there's any particular individual case where you know that a video made a difference.
Well, again, I would say, first of all, I think it was really wise of Ian in how he structured our engagement, because lawyers trained around the world, DLA Piper and the other law firms, are experts at seeing certain things and being able to look at it from a legal mind rather than a different mind. And we at LexisNexis, many of us actually are attorneys, but we're not specialized in human rights crimes. That's really important to get right. And so we are not engaged in that directly. And so again, I turn to Wendy to ask her how that's been used, but I understand it's actively being used in cases right now.
Well, we're going to turn to Kira on another interesting use of the phone app. Before we do that, I just wanted to comment on our Poll Everywhere question. Apparently, the majority, or at least the plurality, believes that lack of tech knowledge among development workers is the biggest obstacle. So that causes me to want to ask you another question. Raise your hand if you believe you are tech savvy. I'm just curious. I won't call on you, but I'm just curious. Assuming we're a room full of development experts, I'm wondering if we have about half, a third, maybe a third of the audience is tech savvy. Do you guys have any comments on that? Do you agree with that?
I have a comment. Like, how many of you know how to take a video on your cell phone?
I can do that because I have two middle school daughters.
So, Stephen, to answer your question from my perspective, I feel that depending on who's in the room, I'm either tech savvy or ignorant. And so it really depends on who the audience is. And you had asked us to think through like other parts of the world and where we've done something in a specific country. And the one that came to mind for me was China. And so our team worked for 10 years in China, and it was to do something that for us is not tech savvy, and that's to put their laws online. Instead of in a book form, it was in an online database that could be searched. And going to, I think, another of your questions, how did that happen? Well, it took a lot of relationship building, but it actually took one young legislator in China who made this his mantra, who really believed in what technology could do to advance China, and he made it his platform. And once he came on board, it took a few more years, but not what it was in the beginning part of that. So it really depends on what country, what problem you're trying to solve, what people are ready for. It can't be the West telling the rest.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I've been somewhat intimidated by tech solutions, at least mentally. I don't think immediately of sort of high-tech solutions to problems. I immediately go to sort of the tried and true sort of rule of law handbook. And hopefully, maybe one of the takeaways of today and some of the things that Sheldon and all of you are displaying is that we can think tech-wise a little bit when we are looking at our basket of interventions available. Okay, so we also have another interesting app, and I'm going to hand it over now to Kira.
Thank you, Steve. I'm talking about a Legal Defenders mobile app, and just to give you a little bit of background, this project came to New Rule as part of the Civil Society Innovation Initiative, which is a civil society strengthening and knowledge sharing project that has been funded by USAID and Swedish SIDA. The project has evolved over the time it's been implemented, and now it's being called Innovation for Change. So you'll see that in the video. And basically, I4C consists of CSOs, civil society organizations that belong to one of 6 regional hubs. And these organizations are being brought together and strengthened through knowledge sharing in this global platform that I4C has developed. And the 6 regions that are being focused on include LAC, MENA, Africa, and then 3 Asias, East Asia, Central Asia, and South Asia. And during the time that the project was being launched, the CSOs in these 6 regions kind of individually as a group recognized and articulated a strong need for information about legal aid and legal aid service providers, other resources, information about what the laws are in their countries about legal aid. And most of these CSOs did not necessarily have legal capacity within them, but they felt it was really important for them to be able to connect either their own organization or their beneficiaries with legal aid assistance. So we were asked to develop an app that would bring together information about various service providers globally and put together something that would connect them very easily. So the video that you're about to see, it's just 3 minutes, is something that we prepared as part of our participation in the International Access to Justice in Criminal Matters conference that was held in Buenos Aires last November, sponsored by UNODC and the International Legal Foundation, so focusing a lot on public defense. And the purpose was for us to kind of engage the practitioners that were there and get them interested in participating in the app. So can roll the video, please.
The Innovation for Change Legal Defenders mobile app, where people connect with legal aid services, support, and resources anywhere in the world. Download the app onto your device or access it through the I4C global platform, and you're just a few clicks away from locating legal aid resources across the globe. Let us show you how it works. Your real-time location appears on the map, as do the locations of the service providers nearby. Users can easily search the I4C database to identify all relevant listings, or refer to the map to see which providers are in your vicinity. Zoom out to reveal more options in your city, country, or region. Green, yellow, and red markers represent lower to higher concentrations of service providers in a particular area. Tap on the List View function, which will show all providers in the database and can be sorted alphabetically or by country. There are listings in English, Spanish, French, and Russian, with more languages planned. View basic contact information by clicking on a specific provider name. From the Profile screen, there may be sharing options, or users can contact service providers by email directly. Simply click the marker to return to the map view of your provider's location. Users may also search by provider categories, including any specialized populations served, the kinds of services offered to clients, whether the provider focuses on criminal cases, civil or administrative matters, or both, and by areas of expertise. Filtered results provide the best matches for users of the Legal Defenders mobile app based on their needs. If you're looking for a particular provider, you may also search by the organization or individual's name, street address, or city in order to find the basic provider profile. In some cases, providers who are concerned about security or personal safety may request that their listing remain confidential. Users may contact these providers through the I4C Platform Administrator, the I4C Legal Defenders app, linking expertise with need wherever it arises.
So we had prepared that some months ago now, and I think the size of the database and some of the things that were reflected there have changed. But basically, the app is really still in pilot form right now, and we are continuing to try to expand the database and refine it. And as I promised Steve, I really was going to share lessons learned in really the database development and what we've seen so far in trying to roll this out. So as I mentioned, the app itself is available. Even though it says it can be downloaded, you have to be part of the I4C platform, and that would require you to apply and be approved, and then your access would then be through the platform. And I think that means that even the potential for what we really saw in the beginning as linking particular potential clients to the actual providers is not quite there yet, because there's that a layer and a kind of a smaller subset of organizations and people who actually do have access to this information. So let me just give you 3 of our kind of biggest lessons learned, and this may feel familiar to those of you who have created either apps or have developed databases or put together networks or association membership data. And the first lesson is that database development and maintenance is extremely labor intensive. And I think we underestimated what that would take to identify and then kind of refine and vet and validate the information. We started out with what we called the snowball methodology. So we contacted our trusted colleagues, and then they provided us with recommendations. And then those who were recommended also made some recommendations, and then they told 2 friends, and so on and so on. And that in some countries was quite successful, and in other countries was absolutely not successful. And so it was really difficult, to tell how that was going to go. And once we had kind of a good inroad and information about either particular NGOs who were working in legal aid, or there was a contact within the Ministry of Justice or a government entity that was responsible for legal aid, then things were quite smooth, and we were able to not only identify agencies and entities, but then particular providers within those entities. But that hasn't been the case across the board, and so as a result, we've really had to go kind of beyond and do our own independent research and kind of get out there and try to contact and get in without a trusted contact giving us access. And that has definitely been a challenge. And of course, one of the things we developed right away was a survey that was, I think in retrospect, a little longer than optimal, because I think in the end, all we really wanted was the information, the data that could connect the provider to the client. But we did ask other questions about the legal aid system and other things that we thought were important in terms of doing the mapping. But I think that was the disincentive for people to kind of complete the whole survey. So we learned that, and then kind of moving on, we reduced the number of questions and really got down to the basics. And I think that, despite your best efforts and despite your colleagues' assurances that these things are going to go out and they'll get out to the people that should be part of the database, that doesn't always happen and people don't always respond. So I think that was, we're going to still have to be dealing with that. And of course, that's, resource connected as well for expanding the database. The other thing I'll say about that is that sometimes, of course, we'd get responses and they'd be incomplete, or we'd do some verification and there would be, dead-end emails or phone numbers, et cetera. And so we've really had to be as flexible as possible and really pretty expansive in terms of who we think would be a good entry. In other words, are you an individual practitioner? Or are you an organization that provides maybe legal information, but not necessarily legal representation or legal advice, that type of thing? So we're learning slowly. One of the things we tried to do as far as verification too is use some triangulation methods when the same provider was recommended by one or more of our contacts. Then we could kind of know that this one was a good one, and we had done the vetting there. Let's see. Oh, and then, as I said, we conducted research on legal aid systems outside of getting information directly from our trusted contacts in countries, especially where we really had not a lot of response. So I think the bottom line lesson here is that this is a dynamic situation, and for anyone, I'm thinking of like Namadi, with their legal empowerment network and other organizations that are trying to maintain an accurate database. It's something that's ongoing and really takes a lot of time and ongoing resources apart from the running of the app. Secondly, the global reach, I think, means challenges in terms of design and resources. We had surveys that were translated into Russian and French and Spanish, and that gleaned a lot of data for us. But because during this pilot part of the project, the interface is just in English, so the data that we got and then input into the app then had the ability to search for it was limited, and one could actually type in a particular service provider or specific information that you knew in Cyrillic, and it would come up, but that's only because it was just matching exactly what you put in. So the labels and things are only still in English now, and that's something that I think, talking about access and talking about, people who are being able to use tech easily. Obviously, language is a huge issue, and I think more resources will have to come to the fore so that we can planned for Arabic and other languages that are outside of the Latin alphabet. And then, as I mentioned before, the app is accessible just through the I4C platform right now. And so as a result, what we mentioned at the end of the video was that some entities and some organizations definitely did raise some issues of privacy and some concerns. So at this point, it's closed enough where we can really have a handle on that. If it was really out and much more generally accessible, then we'd have to put more thought into how we would work with encryption and security. And then last thing is traditional low-tech methods still apply, and this is something we've been talking about already. But in some countries, I saw in Africa in particular, there was a great interest in the app and also a very easy facility with knowing, how it can be used, and they were quite excited. The group that we met with in Buenos Aires was ready to go, and they had provided us a lot of information. In other countries, I'm thinking of some of the places I've worked in South Asia, particularly in rural communities, and in places where the legal aid system is such that you're not necessarily going to be going to an NGO or a non-government entity to get your legal aid. If you are in Latin America in particular, it's very centralized. And so the ability for regular folks to contact an individual service provider through an app is a little more limited, and you'd be really relying on probably an NGO that you're working with or some other entity, organizational entity, then to contact the district legal aid office or something like that through the app, and you'd be still, as an individual client, relying on someone else and just the individual contact and phone that you have, and the app itself, you might not see its direct benefit to you. Let's see. So basically, I think this app, as with most of these things that we're talking about, is just one tool in your toolkit, and I'm hoping that the interest on the part of the CSOs will increase and then kind of move to some further support for the expansion of the app.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think of when I hear, software or app engineers and language translators and the labor-intensive involvement of keeping it alive, I start thinking costs and sustainability, and it's. Thank you for bringing some of those issues up, because sometimes we can be a bit too cheerleader-ish when it comes to new solutions, and it's good to hear about some of the challenges that they present as well. I don't know, Linda or Terry, did you have any questions or comments?
Go ahead.
I guess my question is, you've already addressed it a little bit, but I'm just wondering what new ways we can think of to get the word out.
Right.
That's beyond the best word of mouth mechanism.
Yes. Well, all of you that I know, some of you I've talked with before about the app, and others that are connected with legal aid or access to justice projects. I would love to hear from you, because I think it's not definitely not too late. We want to continue to expand it, and so yes. And if anyone has any other suggestions, I feel like we have gone down a number of paths that have been not as successful as we had hoped, and I think that some of the organizations, and I'll not name names, UNODC and others, there is data there, but they have been very keeping it very close to the chest. There was a global legal aid study that was launched last November when we were in Buenos Aires, but the providers who were surveyed and anyone else that they spoke with in conducting the survey, that was kept confidential, and they weren't really willing to share it. So, that ends up being an issue too, when people are very protective of their data.
I guess that speaks to the collaboration aspects of our previous panel and the difficulties that can sometimes arise.
I was just going to ask, what's the ramp up in teaching people how to use the app, even if it's simple, and keeping new people educated on the use of the app? Because that seems to be a key component of sustainability over time.
Absolutely. Well, I think at this point, any organization who's part of this Innovation for Change platform, they would be able to get, any kind of training or support from the administrator through their global platform. And I think that, that's definitely an issue. I think if we have requests, and certainly the organizations and individuals that are already part of the database, if they have questions, they can send them through the app, and then we'll be able to hopefully, respond to those and make sure that people understand, how to do it. But I think, this issue that we have been talking about who is going to use it, and then, it's not necessarily who's going to benefit from it. So we'll have to see how that might be able to be more easily rolled out into into rural areas or villages. Of course, you can have it on your desktop as well. So if people don't have access to a smartphone, then there is a, other way to get to the data that way.
Okay, well, we're going to now zoom out a little bit further. We started with country-specific solutions. We've moved on to international type of solutions. We're going to scale it further and think really big. There was some discussion in the first panel about SDGs, particularly SDG 16. And with that intro, I'm going to hand it over to Terry. She'll give the rest.
Thank you so much. And I was really pleased to hear Helen in our first panel talking about the SDGs and measurements, and how are the member states going to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. I had the privilege of sitting in a room at the South Bank Centre in the UK 2 days ago with the executive director of the UN Global Compact. And she said, we only have 5,000 days. Now that may seem like a lot of time, but when you think of how vast the Sustainable Development Goals are, all 17 of them, and you think of what it took to do each of the projects that we've just talked about, and the projects that you're working on, and how member states are going to achieve those goals that quickly, we're almost running a marathon right now. Right now. And I was part of a group of people who were there to talk about inspiration for achieving the SDGs by 2030. And it will take literally all of us. Well, it was hosted by, as I said, our parent company, RELX Group. And in the last example, I told you a little bit about LexisNexis and our background and our corporate mission to advance the rule of law. About 2 years ago, that turned into a tangible working directly with the UN, in that our CEO was giving an award to the then Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, and Ban Ki-moon heard of our rule of law principles. And he was so impressed that he said, I don't want to just embrace them. I want to turn it into a program with the UN Global Compact. And so for the next year, the UNGC hosted 21 different workshops, literally around the world. Lexis was involved with most of them. And we heard from people in government, business, academia, and others on what is important for businesses to do to advance the rule of law around the world. Well, while this was happening, our sister company, Elsevier, was also deeply active with a different part of the UN. And they worked on a bibliometric review of the science behind the Sustainable Development Goals. And they released that global report the day before the member states adopted the Sustainable Development Goals. And so our overarching CEO, Eric Engstrom, much like Mark did in the other example, decided that he needed to have a project that showcased what our company as a whole could do in a creative, collaborative way that's never been done before, to show our strong commitment to achieving the SDGs. And so with that, I'd like to cue the video. So that was just released 2 days ago. Steve was we were a little nervous whether it would make it to this program in time. And so literally 2 days ago, we launched this free resource that's available to anybody around the world. Now, what does this mean and how does this help? Let me step back again. It has been my privilege to serve on the steering committee of the Global Alliance for Reporting Progress under Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies. That's run by the UNDP as the secretariat. The member state that's chairing it right now is Qatar, but Mexico, Sierra Leone, Tunisia, Norway, UK, they're all sitting in the room with us, asking themselves how they are going to measure under Goal 16. When the team took Eric's request to develop this resource center, again, for free, using our own resources, I immediately saw what that potential could be, and I started bringing in the comments and suggestions from that Global Alliance Steering Committee to the team working on developing the Resource Center. And so, the Resource Center, by the way, out on the table is a brochure that I wrote when I was in my other iteration, which is with the RELX Group, describing what our companies are and the strengths of our companies. And I like to say that we're the largest company you didn't know you knew. So Lexis, if you're involved in laws, you've probably used us in law school or to research a case, and we are that. But we are so high tech and we have such information. And we have a saying that we like to say that is, when you put information and technology in the right hands, you give people the power to change the world. Well, our sister company, Elsevier, is as known in the medical and scientific community as we are in the legal one. They are the 800-pound gorilla of publishing in science, medical, and technology. Hence, the report that they launched on sustainable science. Our other sister company, Reed Exhibitions, you probably have heard of. They're the largest trade show producer in the world. They handle over 500 events a year, touching 7 million people. And they also have Comic-Con. They're the cool kids in the group. And so when you think about what it will take to achieve those sustainable development goals, and you think of the people and the resources that we have, and then you add in a final sister company, which is LexisNexis Risk and Business Analytics. And you realize that for more than 100 years, that company has been helping banks get money to the right place. And so they are experts in anti-money laundering and anti-corruption. And they're used by law enforcement for key things, such as knowing when someone's committed tax fraud or helping to bring missing kids home, because that's the type of data we have. I was thinking of a slide that one of the earlier panels had with vectors. And in the Inspiration Day, I was seeing our companies in vectors that are three-dimensional. And I told the UNGC and our UNDP partners that our clients are not UN clients. And so if they're only using the voices they have at the UN to promote what they're trying to do, they're missing all of the businesses, all of the schools, all of the governments that are using us to solve their problems every day. What is in the tool? Well, you saw that Elsevier has scientific articles. They've pledged to give the top 100 scientific articles each year to this site for free for anyone to use around the world to do their research on elements related to the Sustainable Development Goals. You saw a brief clip with the news tracker, added that in because of the input from the Global Alliance. They needed to be able to see the news that is happening in real time. And moreover, they added a map. And the map was also something that we talked about at length, because when you're reporting under your country, the greatest impact is not seeing what the world is doing or seeing what the region is doing. I strongly suggested that they make it so you can see what your country is doing. And so you can double click on that map and drill down country specific to read the news articles right now, sorted by the SDGs. Exhibitions is giving information about the exhibitions happening around the world that people can go to meet with people who are also interested in the SDGs, such as ones on climate change or the oceans. And finally, it's a place where you can talk with others who are as deeply committed to responding to the SDGs as you might be. So Mendeley is known in the scientific community for a kind of social blog where experts talk to each other and form partnerships. Mendeley has set up a site for each of the SDGs. You can go on there right now and ask your burning question, and people will start jumping in and start giving their answers. Well, I am pleased and proud to say that the UN saw the value of this as well. The UNDP will be partnering and putting their information on our site, as will the UNODC. You just mentioned them. They have given us the permission to take all of their reports, so long as they are attributed to them, and put them searchably on our site. UNDESA and the UNESCO will also be partnering with us, and we're adding more daily. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay. Any final questions or thoughts?
What's the language? Is it ever?
Great question. So working with the UN, there were two questions that they had to make it accessible to the UN community. First was languages, so I was going to ask you about languages, but you answered the question before I could ask that. Right now, we were working to get it ready for the launch, and so phase 2 and phase 3 is going to start now that the launch is successfully completed. It will be in the 6 languages of the UN to start with, and more will be added. The other component that the UN required if they were to partner with us was that it be fully disability accessible, and that means to the blind and others. And so I watched as the kind of demo of it changed in its style to make it so that it can be used by the disabled community, which is a requirement for their systems.
Question about the language. So the content is going to be translated, or the website and the...
I understand the whole thing will be.
Oh, wow.
So much as we added the map and it came in like a day before the launch, I mean, when I was not responding to your emails, there was a reason. We were really trying to get it ready for the launch.
Yeah.
But from what I understand, it will be fully translated into the languages.
Wow. And the other question is it going to be available, is there a mobile version? Or I know you can, of course, Google it on your phone, but...
Absolutely. So we're not creating an app at this point because it's fully accessible on a smartphone or a tablet. And so I also gave you all postcards, so you don't have to write it down. There are postcards at the information table. Check it out. And actually grab a few and give it to people who are trying to figure out solutions to their problems. But it should work right now, so test it while you're sitting here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very cool. Linda, any thoughts, or should we? Okay.
Please go on.
Let's queue up the final poll everywhere question before we ask the audience for comments and questions. I think we have one last poll. There we go. In discussing that, what does the panel think? But if you're answering in the audience, don't listen to us yet. Linda, what do you think? How would you vote?
I would say that probably the key thing is to look for your problem rather than for the technology, what to do with the technology you have. I mean, don't solve problems that aren't there. As we did by putting something on a web page that nobody ever looks at. I mean, don't need to do that. People were using the phones. We didn't need to add that. And also that you have to match the technology to the environment. I mean, we're all smart practitioners. We know this. Keep it contextual. But basically, don't over-add technology. You want the technology to be as simple as possible.
Okay. Well, it looks like the audience does agree with you.
Yeah, keep it simple.
I would have gone with, don't worry about the cost. And that's something that I can say as a for-profit business, but I also know that cost is deeply important to everybody in the room. But if we're going to get there, I think there are sources out there, and I think a couple of the other panels were talking a bit about corporate entities and others. People should be thinking about this, and we're engaged because it's the right thing to do, but eventually it will also help our bottom line, and it will also help economic development and help us get into countries where right now maybe we can't get into. And so look for what the right solution is. I agree with Linda. Look for the problem and don't chase the money first. Know what your core skills are and know how that can fit somebody's problem, and then you'll figure out the money.
Okay. So I'm going to open it up now to the audience. Are there any questions or thoughts about some of these? We have a question here for the individual in the middle. We'll start with...
Thanks. So I had a couple of questions going back to the app. So in terms of a use case, I was wondering if you could maybe walk through an actual use case of somebody who would use this app in both the camera one and the other one you're describing. It seems like one of the biggest problems that people have is affordable, low-cost legal advice. And these smartphones give you the ability to hyper-localize that and provide a real solution for it. But I'm having trouble kind of deciphering what makes your app, for instance, different from like a Google Maps or an Apple Maps where you can just literally Google, a service provider or something like that. And then also with the camera app, in terms of just being more than a camera, like do people have access to this database of other atrocities that have been witnessed and solved? And, would it be able to provide some kind of legal guidance for people going forward? It's mostly a question, I guess, about the problems that these apps solve and kind of where you see them going.
Okay. Do you want to take the first one?
Sure. So in terms of the Legal Defenders app, I would say it's distinct from, a Google Maps or something in that you can certainly find the location of a particular address. In a lot of these countries, it's probably not as likely that you may find individual providers and certainly ones who are willing to and interested in interacting with others. So it's kind of a chosen group, and it will allow you can contact them kind of more confidentially or, directly, and you've got a group that's kind of a pre-selected, vetted group of providers that will be available perhaps to potential clients, but also being able to connect with one another. In that case, maybe there's less of a difference, but I would say that we're, pulling together groups of providers from all over a country and all over the world that really aren't anywhere in one place in a directory.
I would say that for an atrocity around the world, any one of us at any point in time can be a witness. When I think of the UK and what happened in Manchester, when I think of the marathon in Boston, and I happen to have been in a conference in a room with the Attorney General of Massachusetts at the time she found out that her city had been attacked, we could all be there. And so what this app, having it on your phone, means that you can take your data for something that's truly horrific, truly an atrocity, and have it be used in a secure location for legal purposes. And so it would be the IBA who has determined what a true atrocity is. The example in the video was mass murders in Sri Lanka, but I think we can all think of others that are true atrocities. But you don't know if you're going to suddenly be put in that place. And you also don't want to be, quite literally, the next victim. And so building the case requires you to be safe, but for the information to go to legal experts to use. And for a true atrocity, we're really talking about international tribunals. And so that takes a longer period of time than just, he hit me with the car, et cetera, unless it's a true atrocity. And so the true international cases take a bit longer. And it's not the one where I think you would go down the street, but maybe you would work with lawyers such as those at DLA Piper and elsewhere to give the legal advice as how to get that legal remedy for the atrocities.
And Terry, tell me if I'm right here, but as I understand it, the sort of secret sauce in that software is that when you present a video that's been filtered through that software, it guarantees that it hasn't been edited
That's
in
correct.
any way. So that's how it's different from just opening the iPhone and hitting the camera button.
It's preserved in a chain of custody. And so what they didn't want to do at the IBA, that was their problem. You know, listening to the problem was something that Linda said earlier on in the panel. We listened to what Wendy was trying to solve, and the chain of custody and the metadata was absolutely something that we can combine because that's what our experts are. But we handle personally identifiable information around the world, or we wouldn't be working for our sister company with law enforcement or others. And that's a huge responsibility, and our technology is equal to it. So by working with us, it can't get hacked, it can't get changed in any way that would change that custody.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts about technology and the rule of law? Or any innovations in general, if you were unable to get your question or comment out earlier? It's Friday afternoon.
There's one.
Everybody has that Friday afternoon look. And then we have two questions, one, right, and then the gentleman, yeah. So we'll start.
Hi. So Linda addressed it a little bit in terms of the applications that ABA is using, but treatment of personal information, location data, not just the outcomes, but what is your process in thinking about those problems when you're developing a solution? You know, how do you balance the need for efficacy with the very real risks in a conflict or post-conflict environment?
Maybe we'll get the question over here as well.
Sure, thank you. I've been a manager for some rather large offices in sub-Saharan Africa, and one of our frequent challenges with our staff from my former organization was constantly rolling out new platforms, new applications. The mandates from headquarters offices in Washington to learn something new multiple times a year, new passwords, new platforms, and the look on staff eyes every time you have to train them on a new application. I think I guess my point or question is innovation versus integration. And there's something to be said for being able to do everything from Facebook or from Google, and what, if anything, are you doing to work within what the majority of people are already using to integrate some of these innovations?
Okay.
Do you want me to start?
Sure.
So in terms of the process for thinking about data protection, I wasn't part of the teams that developed these, but I can say that they clearly went through very different processes for Turkey and for DRC. And I think that in DRC, the assessment was that while there was a need to not publicize victim name and location and everything like that, that information didn't need to be encrypted beyond being put carefully into the judicial case management system. So it goes into the database, and then once it's there, it's protected by whatever mechanisms protect the case management system writ large. What we did find is that the police, the glitch in our case filing system was that the police that we trained to use these had a terrible tendency to use the phones for their personal messaging as well, which is not particularly secure, as well as being a little bit corrupt. That was just a question of continuing to work on the project, continuing to work with the police we had trained. And again, I think it's very contextual. The situation in DRC, it's a question of how valuable and how risky that information might be perceived to be. So that information here could be quite useful or quite valuable and needs to be protected. That information in the DRC was assessed to be less at risk because less desirable. As my colleague put it, people don't, it's not even a stigma to be involved in an SGBV crime in DRC because it's so widely acknowledged to happen, which is very sad. But part of the calculation about whether that was a problem that we needed to fix. So I think the focus was more on trying to get the cases filed so we could increase the volume of cases being prosecuted, as opposed to focusing on super protection of the information beyond what we thought was a normal risk in DRC. In Turkey, the political risk was much more elevated, and I think there was a desire to try to buy the trust or make sure that we were not appearing to ask any risky behavior of the Syrians that we were trying to reach. And so the way the information is presented is that we don't need to take your name. All we need is to get into the system, all we need is your cell phone number. Now, true, the phone providers, the service providers, could be compelled to connect the names and numbers for a formal investigation or upon request of the government. But again, we're assessing that that is a risk that is currently not present because the information we're providing is Turkish government law on the rights of Syrian refugees. And it is implemented through a partnership with the Turkish Lawyers Union. So given the partnerships and the situation and the desire to work closely with a government-affiliated body, we made the judgment that we didn't need to do more than anonymize the information that we were concerned with. So it's a little bit different than the mass atrocity video, which is much more highly sensitive and has a real legal element to whether or not that video is usable as evidence. Integration is a really interesting question, and I think that in the case of our projects, we made a real effort not to make them complicated. And the Turkish case, the Syrians are simply using text technology that's already on their phones. There's nothing new. In the DRC case, it's separate special technology, but not complicated. It's a template that is self-explanatory, and you type the information in. So, and it is automatically integrated into the filing system in the capital city database. So that was designed to be as simple and as integrated as possible, but that's an excellent point to keep in mind.
So on the Google and Facebook question, Google is very definitely a partner that we're aware of out there. And so in some instances, we're aware of Google because the question has been put to me in the past, well, why can't I just Google my legal information? Why do I have to pay for LexisNexis? Great question. Well, if you want to have accurate, timely information that you know is up to date, I would go to a trusted legal service provider versus Google that might have information that is old or potentially faulty because you get all of it. So we are experts at getting the right answer, and we're starting to really get more into AI and anticipate the question and get the answer that you were actually asking that isn't the one you asked. One way that we've partnered with Google that we didn't talk about that is really fascinating is in Myanmar. And so if you know Myanmar, you know that land rights is a huge, huge issue. And they don't even have really the system to protect the land rights that are being jeopardized every day. And so one of my good colleagues was contacted by Google, who had heard about her good work on rule of law in Myanmar and said, we want to help. And so they're doing a mapping project using Google Maps and marrying it to our data and technology and our knowledge of the laws. So it's not exclusive, and sometimes you don't necessarily need to. Sometimes you want a Google answer, and sometimes you want a Lexis answer. To go to the Facebook question, now, I don't know if this is the one that is on the free site that we just launched a couple of days ago, but we do have the ability to layer in what people are saying in social media into our news, because sometimes it's a news feed through social media. And so that's a higher layer of information, but maybe in certain countries, people are more vocal on social media than they are through the news service for whatever reason. And so I need to check with my team because that's a good question and I don't know the exact answer on that. But they're doing their good work too. They know their core skills too. and we'll need them at the table in order to solve these problems.
And I would just add that in case of our app, that we specifically asked the providers and those that are part of the database if they are okay with having their information out there, and for those who were at all concerned. And there was really just not that many, because I think our population is really in the civil and the criminal side, but largely civil legal aid service providers, and fewer in the kind of human rights defender category. But it's definitely an issue, and so that's something that with the I4C administrator we'll need to really figure out as the database expands.
Okay. Well, as I see, the counter here is telling me that we're about out of time, so we're going to wrap it at that. I want to thank our panelists for their very interesting apps. Perhaps we can check back in a year and see how they're doing. And we have some final closing comments from our Deputy Director, Hamid Khan.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for enduring a Friday with us. And as you can tell, it's been a very engaging conversation on the multitude of challenges that we face in the rule of law field and the attempts to innovate what is a very complex mosaic of power, relationships, law, authority, and of course, the most interesting dynamic of all, people. On behalf of the Rule of Law Collaborative, I wish to extend our most profound thanks to the International Network to Promote the Rule of Law, to Leila Mooney here at the United States Institute of Peace, and of course for their graciousness in allowing us to have the event here and with this fantastic venue space, to all the panelists who travel both near and far for sharing their thoughts and their willingness in a frank and open discussion, and of course to all of you for spending your time with us today. A couple of housekeeping matters. Like any good taskmaster, I am reminiscent to remind you that if you've not completed your evaluation, front and back, it is greatly appreciated, because we at the Collaborative are mindful of our monitoring evaluation efforts. And then to also invite you to visit our ongoing enterprise, justtrack.org, for upcoming events. In September, we will be having a training, as Director Joel Samuels had mentioned. Part of our variety of deliverables include the symposium that we have here and presented to you today, but we also have various trainings. In September, we will offer a specialized course on Islamic legal systems. The training is free and will be hosted at our partners at the ABA. And in the fall, we expect to also have a symposium on judicial independence, as well as an introductory training program for those of you both here and those interested in the field of rule of law. We invite you to sign up and be aware of our ongoing work, and again, to thank you. We hope you have a great afternoon and a good weekend. Bye.